Culpable mental states are very important parts of the elements of an offense. Remember, the elements of an offense include the forbidden conduct, the required culpability, the required result, and the negation of any exception to the offense. In this screencast, we'll discuss the culpable mental states. There are 4 culpable mental states in Texas. They are intentionally, knowingly, recklessly, and with criminal negligence. Other states may recognize different versions of culpable mental states or even indicate more, but these are the 4 used in Texas. Mental states are fundamental to criminal law and are connected to what is referred to in Latin as the mens rea, or guilty mind. In general terms, you typically can't commit a crime purely on accident. There has to be some sort of mental awareness going on. Now, this may seem confusing, but basically, you have to have some level of mental awareness, sometimes even just very slight, that your actions are criminal or may result in some negative result that could be considered criminal under law. Individual penal code offenses may contain one or more culpable mental states. Sometimes no culpable mental state is indicated, and if so, the penal code states the reader should assume the culpable mental state is intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly. A statute may occasionally indicate no culpable mental state is required. For instance, intoxication offenses in Chapter 49 require no culpable mental state, but the majority of penal code offenses are linked to a culpable mental state. Let's start with intentionally. Intentionally is a conscious or objective desire to engage in the conduct or cause the result. For instance, when you aim an arrow at a target, you aim at the center of the target. Your intent is to put the arrow in the bullseye. The next culpable mental state in Texas is knowingly. Knowingly means you are aware of the nature of the conduct or that the circumstances exist and your conduct is reasonably certain to cause the result. For instance, when you aim an arrow at a target, you aim at the center of the target. Your objective or intent is to put the arrow in the bullseye, but you know there's a possibility you won't hit the bullseye and instead hit another part of the target. This knowledge is reasonable. The next Texas culpable mental state is recklessly. This is when a person consciously disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk, and the disregard of that risk constitutes a gross deviation from what an ordinary person would exercise. For example, would you fire an arrow at a target with a person standing next to it? No, you wouldn't, or at least I hope not. Why? A reasonable person knows this is a substantial and unjustifiable risk. Someone who would do this is believed to be exercising gross deviation from the norm. Your intent is not to hit the person standing next to the target, but once again, the risk of someone standing next to the target is substantial and unjustifiable, and a reasonable person probably wouldn't do that. The final Texas culpable mental state is criminal negligence. Criminal negligence is when a person ought to be aware of a substantial and unjustifiable risk, and failure to perceive the risk constitutes a gross deviation from what an ordinary person would exercise. So, let's say your archery target is right next to a door. You have the ability to lock the door, but you don't, and someone comes through the door right as you shoot your arrow at the target. Did you know the person was going to come through the door right as you fired? Was it your intent to hit them? No, but the risk of this happening, even though it's remote, might still be considered a substantial and unjustifiable risk. You didn't know, but a reasonable person ought to have known. So let's review. There are 4 culpable mental states in Texas. They are intentionally, a conscious objective or desire to engage in conduct or cause a result; knowingly, aware of the nature of the conduct or that circumstances exist and the conduct is reasonably certain to cause the result; recklessly, a conscious disregard for a substantial and unjustifiable risk that is a gross deviation from the reasonable person standard; and finally, with criminal negligence, when a person ought to be aware of a substantial and unjustifiable risk that is a gross deviation from the reasonable person standard.